Hi, everybody. Welcome to Acknowledging Bias. For this activity, we will spend about 60 minutes, but we will have some pause points. We will wear our champion hats, and we're working on our pathway goal number 3, recognizing and creating a plan to close equity gaps in CS education. If you have the backpacks and identity doc, that worksheet that we used in Module B, it's a good time to pause the recording now and go grab that because we'll reference it pretty soon. Here we go. Remember back to Module B when we spent some time considering the identities that everybody carries around in that proverbial backpack, those characteristics or elements that make us all very unique individuals. Take a moment to review your identity characteristics. You can look back through your grid, your backpack grid, or just um, take a moment to think about that to yourselves. And we're going to build on that. We'd like to explore today a little bit further along the lines of identity, going now into culture. Within our culture groups, people have some, but not necessarily all, identities in common. How do our cultural identities overlap with our personal identities? When might one identity override another? For example, I may identify as a woman first, but when I spot somebody around that's wearing maybe the logo from the university I attended, that part of me, my regional background and my educational background, becomes paramount. And that's something that's true, right? I actually have a story about that. One time I was in Philadelphia, and while I was walking around, I saw a family, and they were all decked out in University of Kentucky sweatshirts. And it was clear that they were trying to figure out directions somewhere. They had a map, they were looking at their phones. So I immediately felt comfortable and at ease with approaching them, and maybe even a little bit obligated since, it looked like they were from where I was from. Sure enough, they were. They were from Kentucky and they were there on spring break. And we chatted for a few minutes and I was able to help them find where they were going. That's an interesting example. And you probably have some that are similar when your cultural groups kind of change your perception of the environment around you and the way that you behave in that moment. We're so complex. Um, Let's explore a little bit about this for a moment. We're going to be a bit selfish and continue thinking about ourselves and focus on our own identities. Our identities and how we perceive the identities of others aren't just words on paper. They play a part in how we behave, whether or not we mean to, and whether or not we realize it. In the example I just gave about recognizing the emblem or the logo from my university, I had a shared culture with that family. But let's think about the opposite situation now when you don't share culture or identities. I'd like for you to take a few moments here and actually pause the recording. You can jot this down on your doc that you were using for your identities, or just think to yourself. But consider the questions that are on the recording. I'd like for you to take some time to think about a moment or an experience you had in which you felt very different from the people that were around you at that time. Close your eyes, get that moment in your head and think about what was happening. How did it make you feel? And were there any kind of ripple effects from that? Did that moment impact your choices or your ideas later on in your life? So go ahead and pause here, and when you're ready, you can restart and we'll pick back up together. Hopefully when you had a chance to think about your moment, you realized, sometimes when there's diversity, there's a chance to feel different, right? A situation with a group of people's individual identities and culture, whether shared or not, means that there's going to be differences. Our brain is always making sense of these differences, even without us knowing. It's just kind of playing in the background there. Today might have been the first time you ever analyzed that moment that you chose to think about. And you might realize that it had some pretty big effects on your life. Let's connect this all together. Typically, when we think about diversity, we just think of it as meaning differences. But the part about we may be treated differently is very key here, and in the way that we're going to be exploring things more. Without even knowing it, whether that moment happened a few days ago or years and years ago when you were children, that moment may have shaped an implicit bias in your brain. This is the definition that PDE uses for implicit bias. It's important that we recognize that implicit biases we possess, and also just consider how they impact us as people, but also as educators. We all have implicit biases. And when you hear that or even just see the words, you might kind of have a default reaction to be like, no, 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 not me. I don't judge people. Like I'm not a bad person like that. But here's the thing. You don't mean to, and you don't even want to probably, but something in your brain is acting differently, and we all have implicit biases. No one is safe from them, and we can't just erase them from the world and have this perfect utopia where they don't exist. Implicit biases come from our own experiences, especially those from our childhood, and what we're exposed to on a larger scale, like the news, media, everything that's coming in around us. We have implicit biases that are positive, and we have some that are negative. It's worth noting, though, that we generally tend to hold implicit biases that favor our own in group or cultural groups. We're going to spend some time exploring this a little bit more because, like I said, it's human to kind of to hope and believe that it does not involve or impact you, but the science has proven that it really does affect all of us, and we all have them. So let's use some science to kind of get to the root of it. For this activity, we're going to be using Project Implicit, which is a nonprofit collaboration between a lot of different researchers, but it's kind of housed out of Harvard right now. There's a whole list of exams, and they are the IATs. You'll see that, and the exams measure the strength of associations you have between concepts and evaluations, whether they're good or bad, or stereotypes like athletic or clumsy. Although they're accessible from mobile devices, the IATs involve inputting quick responses with the spacebar and letter keys. So we do recommend taking the exams on a device that has a full keyboard. You can choose to pause the video here and go explore the Project Implicit website and take a few of those IATs, or you can wrap up the recording with me now and then do the IATs later. We'd like for you to try at least 2 IAT exams. You don't have to do them back to back, but before you end this module or this activity and this whole module, we'd like for you to try at least 2. There's a whole list of them. We'd like for you to pick from that short list that we have with the exams that align specifically to the groups of students that we've identified as underrepresented in CS education. So those exams are the one on disability, gender science, race, skin tone, or Native and Native Americans. But for your second exam, you can choose any of those IATs to explore more. So whether it's from the list that we have there or any of them on the website. Now that you've had a chance to try out some of the IATs, there's one more thing that I'd like to share with you. If you didn't notice, those IATs are very specific, right? They focus on just one identity. But like we've already talked about, none of us are just one thing. We need to consider how someone's experiences are shaped not just by each of their identities, but also the combination of their identities. Unfortunately, the reality is that some people face even more negative biases in their life because of specific combinations of their identities. This concept is explored with intersectionality. For example, we know that male students are much more likely to sign up for computer science courses. But if we only focus on male versus female enrollment, we're ignoring a lot of other data within the male population of students. For example, we're ignoring the data about male students who are also English language learners.
one of the groups of students that in Pennsylvania, we've really struggled to engage in computer science learning so far. Here's another example extending beyond computer science classrooms. Students of color and students with disabilities, and that layered or intersectional identity of students of color with disabilities, all three of those subpopulations, they're much more likely to face severe disciplinary consequences than their peers. That is explored with the term significant disproportionality. If you'd like more information on that and the issues around significant disproportionality, you can reach out to us on the patent team. Hopefully, this gives another viewpoint or another layer to our understanding of identity and culture and diversity for the work moving forward. We'd like for you to reflect on your experience with the IATs so far and do that through the Schoology discussion board. You do not have to share or submit your test results. We just want you to engage in an open conversation about what you were feeling, what ideas are coming to mind from that activity. And we'll continue working through some of these questions and these thoughts in the upcoming modules. Thanks so much.